So when I was a child, as many of you know, I had a spiritual experience that opened my heart. And I fell in love with the divine, and I wanted more of this divine experience. But the church in which I was raised, and I spent years trying to find how to get more of that. And what I learned primarily, however, were values and morals when we went to church, how to be with each other, the golden rule, or we were here to love one another, which I loved. But I didn't know how to open up spiritually. So the way I thought the way to cultivate my spiritual life was to be really moral. So I was a very moral person to the point of probably being really annoying to my brothers because I was holding on so tight. That was going to be my way. I was very morally righteous. I claimed that. I was just sort of, that was my way of saying, I want to be a good person. So I was always trying to be a good person. So sometimes that came off rigid, sometimes it came off looking my nose down at people, but because they weren't behaving correctly, but that's all I knew. And my mother actually, that's why she had us go to church. She herself didn't believe in any of the transcendent stuff. I remember her saying, well, I don't know about all those miracles, and I definitely am very doubtful about that whole resurrection story. But what Christianity teaches is really wonderful, and I want you to be exposed to that. So that's why she had us go to church, was to learn values. And I went to a church where we didn't learn about fear or the devil or Satan or hell. So those things just didn't exist in my world. It was just we were here to be loving, and Jesus was the greatest human being on earth who was loving. So he was completely relatable. That's okay. See that? She goes like this. See, you didn't do anything wrong. So it was all very human, how to be human, basically a good person. And I remember my oldest brother, Dan, who was an atheist, said to me, I was telling him, well, you have to be a good person, and you learn this from Christianity. He says, no, you don't. He said, you don't need a God you don't need some transcendent being to tell you to be good. If you want to be in a social world and thrive, the only way that's going to work is if you have some laws, if you have some morality of how to treat one another. Because if you go around taking from one another and hurting one another, no community is going to thrive. And we're social animals. We are going to always be in community. So we naturally will come up with our own ethics and our own morals, and you don't need this from some transcendent self. And that sort of threw me into a tailspin, because that's the only thing at that point that I knew what religion was morals. And I bring that up because Confucius himself, to me, wasn't particularly religious. I wouldn't necessarily put him in a book about the world's religions. In fact, after reading the section in world's religions, I Googled him, and they refer to him more of as a philosopher. They didn't put anything about religion, and I think that's more accurate. He brought an ethics. He did say he got these ideas from the ancestors that were in heaven. And he said, but his focus wasn't on the ancestors in heaven. His focus was on this world here. He said, let's deal with one world at a time. So let's deal with this world. So he was very practical and down to earth, which is valuable. And I love, as we heard in the reading, in China, they combined Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism with a little of shaman indigenous cultures. That, to me, the Taoist aspect, which we're going into the month of June, is the spiritual aspect. For those of you who were here last week and we're talking about the spiritual bodies, the energy body and the causal body, that really, Taoism speaks to that. And Confucianism speaks to the physical life. So I thought we should spend at least one Sunday talking about the physical life, because almost every Sunday we're talking about the spiritual aspect of life and how they're all related, but it's usually, my intention usually goes towards the causal idea of it. So today is the physical. We're in this world. We are dealing with people. We are social animals. Very few people on this planet were made to live completely by themselves as hermits in isolation. Even monastics live in community. So we're always going to be drawn to people. So the question is how do we behave with one another, and how do we create a way of being that serves all of us so that we may thrive? What Confucius wanted to create was a sense of moral ethics. Moral is an individual desire. Ethics is sort of put down upon you by an external authority. Morals is something you choose to do on your own. So morals is your own guiding moral. So as we're looking at this today and throughout this week, the invitation is, what are your morals? Could you write down what your morals are, what matters to you and how you treat other people? It's just an interesting question. In our work life, what are your morals and your ethics, and how you deal with your colleagues, how you deal with your employers, how you deal with your clients, how do you deal with your family members, how do you deal with strangers on the street? Do you have a moral code that you go by, that you live your life by? So his desire was that people would be morally engaged on their own, so you wouldn't need the law to come in, that people would behave morally whether the law was looking or not. And we see this a lot in, Kathy was talking about being in Japan, and Confucianism also embedded in the East Asian cultures as well as Japan, and their crime rate is so much lower, and their need for lawyers is so much lower, because the way we look at how to behave now is if no one's looking, it's okay, so we're suing people all the time. There was, I just read this yesterday. I have to admit, I only read the headline, so I don't know much about it, but Sesame Street is suing a movie that Melissa McCarthy's doing because she's using puppets in a very sort of R-rated fashion. And they use, in their advertisement, we're the street without Sesame or something like that. So they're alluding to a children's program, and Sesame Street feels very protective. So the way to handle it is to sue. And the idea that Confucius is saying is, can't we just have some moral ethics, not because you're going to get sued or not sued, but a sense of how to treat other people with respect, with value. Yes, so you could say, well, the moral here is to have freedom of speech, but is my freedom of speech hurting? Is it for the higher good of everybody, or is it just for my own good, my own playfulness? What if we started looking at, is it for everybody's highest good, or is this just for my own good? And that's really where he was trying to shift where he was. So there was a golden age of China, and then when he came along, and I'm just so you know, I'm getting all of this from Houston Smith's book. I am no expert on Confucianism or Chinese history. There was a golden era, and then it sort of all was falling apart. Everybody was doing their own thing. Nobody was following. Everyone was saying, what's mine? So this group is over here, this group is over here, this is group over there, and everyone was fighting for their own way. And I'm like, wow, that sounds so familiar. That cohesiveness had completely dissolved. And so he came along and was trying to create this idea of what is these ethics that we can all agree on. And so we look at in our culture today, what are these ethics that we could all agree on, regardless of where we are individually, what's good for us personally? Is there something that we can find that we can say, this is what we all believe is true? So in our country today, we can say, what do we ethically believe as humans, as sisters and brothers on this planet? We've become so, I think actually political parties have taken, in many ways, religion with the passion and the intensity and the identity that we feel with the political party, whether it's Republican, Independent, Democrat. There's got to be a place where we all meet as human beings, that we just say, we value, what are those ethics, that it doesn't matter what political party, what my religion is or not a religion, whether I'm secularist, humanist, whatever, what is those commonalities? And that's really what I think Confucius brought that was so valuable, was that it was free from religion, it was free from theology, it was free from any political system, it was just humanitarian. It was just, what do we as human beings value? Now, Confucius was not successful in his lifetime, which surprised me. I just assumed they took on his values right away. They did not. He was going around from village to village and township to township, and they weren't, because he was asking people to give up their own individual needs sometimes for the greater good, because his focus was always on the greater good, not on individual needs. And so they resisted him, and so it took a while after he died, and his students, the ideas, I remember someone said, when someone says something that's true, whether you like it or not, it sticks with you. You can't help it. And that's what I feel with Confucius. He was saying these principles that were very valuable. I love the one I posted on Facebook about the first thing, for 2,000 years in the Confucian era of China, the first thing that every child learned how to read was, human beings are by nature good. And that was universal. Everyone was learning that. How amazing is that? If every child was first learning from day one, human beings are naturally loving. Human beings are naturally good. We may have deviations, we have challenges, but our nature is to be loving and to be good. Incredible. So he's sharing these ideas, and so eventually the government takes on it, and it wasn't just the government. Confucius' idea, and I always got excited by this, is that these ethics, not a religion, not a political theory, but these ethics, these values, would permeate the entire culture. So it was in toys, it would be in movies, they didn't have movies, theater, books, art, that it pervaded every aspect, the philosophy, that everything that you went to, it started pervading the culture. And if I have not been over to Asia, but for those of you who have, and my family has, there is just a sense of how to treat other people. There's something like 150 names for people what to call family members, because every relationship had a specific way of the way you act and receive. It was very respectful. It's still there, the energy of it. It's still very much alive, although not quite as much. They say Confucianism sort of ended its era in 1905. So he brought these ideas of ethics, of how to treat one another. And so we look at each other and we say, what are our ethics? And why are they hard to keep? One of the things in history, if you've heard of spiral dynamics, I've talked in integral theory about vertical stages of development, and I usually talk about it in terms of individual people. What spiral dynamics looks at, it's a spiral, is that cultures throughout history have gone from we really embrace the individual to we really embrace the collective. We really embrace the individual, we really embrace the collective. And it's a spiral. We're evolving our understanding of how to embrace the individual more and more. We're evolving to our understanding of community. But there's this constant dance between the individual and the community. And why this is important and why we have these struggles sometimes is because, for instance, reading Confucius's many of his statements, I sort of like get constricted. It feels very, I feel as an individual that it's a lot. Three of his 5 main points are all around family, and family is central in the way he sees things. And I grew up almost in the exact opposite type of family. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's just what I'm used to. So when I read it, it feels very confining because my family was very individually oriented. So the question is how to have a collective ethos, ethics, morals that is about, I want the greater good for everybody, but at the same time I want to thrive as an individual. And that becomes interesting because sometimes our desires come in conflict. I remember an individual sharing, he said, well, I don't understand. He said, I understand the whole patriarchy thing. He said, but sometimes people don't understand that he was talking about Judaism. In Judaism, yes, it was a patriarchal system, but it's not like it always served the men. He said, they came up with laws that did not serve man's natural way of being. He said, so we had laws that basically said, never have sexual relations until you're married. When you get married for life, or God hates you. And he said, what man wants to live by those rules? He said, so why would morals like that come along? Why do we create these morals and these ideas? Because at that time, people were not surviving. What helped people survive was community, and if people were, what they found in relationships is if people are jumping around with a lot of different relationships and you don't have that strong moral family essence, your community, your tribe will die away. one of the things that we see about often these tribes is they do die away. And someone's asked, well, why Judaism is just a small little tribe like hundreds and thousands of other tribes that lived on earth. Why did this tribe have such an impact? And some of the answers are they had this moral ethics of how to survive as a community, to be a really strong community of morals and values, which was about the community. So you had to repress a little bit of your individual desires to make the community work. But our times are different now. So I was thinking, when I was in 1983, junior in high school, I heard the World Future Society came and spoke. And it was great because they were sharing things that are happening today. They said were going to happen. I'm like, there's no way we're going to do all our shopping online. And I didn't even know what online was, but they were just saying you're not going to have to go out shopping and you're going to be doing it on computer. And it just made no sense to me in 1983. And here we are. A really cool group. And Barbara Marx Hubbard was the president, and she is continuing on. She's in her 70s now in consciousness studies. And I remember her saying, and it was interesting, she said the average age, actually I heard the average age in 1900 was 45, but I Googled it, and they said actually the average age in 1900 was 30. But if you live to age 20, if you pass the infant mortality rate, you might live to 40s or 50s. So most of us would either not be alive or we'd be very near our end of life. But that also gives a different sensibility when you say married for life. And then I was looking back, and basically I went back to the 1400s, to the 3rd century, and it seems to be 30 was the average age for a long time, going up to 40s and 50s if you made it that far. So marriage was very different. And what Barbara Marx Hubbard was saying, we're looking at morals and ethics because they change. This is my point. They don't come from the causal. Moral and ethics are created by human beings so we can thrive. So what Barbara Marx Hubbard was saying, because we have these much longer life, that there's actually 3 stages of relationship. There's the romantic stage where you're just having a wonderful time and playing, and what you want from that experience in life is different than when you want to settle down and get married. And that's the 2nd stage, is marriage, family. And so you make a commitment just for that. And then the 3rd stage is companionship. Who's going to be your companion for the rest of your life, to the end of your years? And she said often that companion, because this was her experience, is different than who you raise your children with. That who you raise your children with, and I think it hit me because my parents were just separating, and my mom said over and over, and over again, she would say, if I had to do it all again, I would do it the exact same way. Your father was exactly who I wanted to be with, to raise children with. And they were perfect. They had the exact same values. She said, but that's not who I want to spend my elder years with. We have different ways of how we want to have fun. And so it was a whole different stage. So when Barbara Marx Hubbard said that, it just sort of keyed in. Now, some people find their sweetheart in high school and spend the rest of their life in bliss, and that's wonderful. But what Barbara Marx Hubbard was saying, perhaps we shift our ideas. See, we still have the marriage ethic and moral and value from 2,000 years ago. And she's saying, what if we shifted that ethic so when you have a relationship with somebody, you're not doing it for 70 or 80 years, which that did not exist back then, but you're doing it for a stage in your life. This is my romantic stage. I'm with you. I may not want to be married to you, but I love this time. Or I really would love to raise family with you. Or I really, and then after then we'll revisit. I don't know. I'm just saying. Okay. There's some problems with my plan. It wasn't my plan. I take no credit for it. Barbara Marx Hubbard. It's her fault. But I'm just saying, we evolve and have changed. And so ethics and morals change. We are in a much more complex society than when Confucius lived. We have people who are on a spiral staircase, are at different stages of development. So even how we interpret values is very different. So it's much more complicated. But I think there's basic things. You know, I was hearing, unfortunately, I was saying, I got to just see what the headlines were for the week. So I heard, I can't speak about it, but there are headlines of children being taken from their mothers at the border for immigrants. And I'm like, that's not even a party issue. 99% of human beings would say, that's just not good to be separating children and parents. We know that instinctively. Every human being just feels that, no, that is not what you do, is take children from. So can't we just have these common We don't steal from one another. That's just not, we can't thrive in a community if we're taking things from one another, if we can't trust one another. And to the place where we can start saying, can we create a common ethics in our, I remember reading this chapter 25 years ago because it really got my imagination going of what if we did have a common ethics? What if we did have our version of a 10 Commandments, but we create it as a culture, as a community of what our basic 10 values are, that everyone, and we teach it to our children, and it's in throughout, as he was saying, throughout our culture, so people just live that way, not because we're going to get sued if we don't act that way, not because we're trying to please anybody externally, but we just have that moral, ethical code that we feel within us. This makes sense to me. I'm not hurting anybody. See, what's happening now is we're having divorce rates that are are crazy, and I don't think people are any happier because we have more divorces. I don't think people are saying, "Oh, this is really working for us." So maybe there's a different code that we should be looking at and saying, what would work more to bring greater joy and happiness, to bring in ourselves in alignment with what's actually going on in our life rather than pretending to live in the past. And if we did that every 100 years, we just have these, we create our ethic codes, moral codes, 10 of them. And every 100 years we look at them and say, where have we evolved? Does this still apply to our life today, our culture today? We're moving so much into artificial intelligence. If we created moral laws now, in 100 years they might be completely irrelevant. Who knows? What do you think about that? It's interesting, isn't it? And this is all on the physical level. And what Integral would say, Integral Theory's idea is, we want to have ethics that serve both the individual and the collective. We want to start moving. There's been this pendulum swing between individuation. So when we started the country, it was the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and it was very much about individual fulfillment. And then, but then there was a feeling, well, what about the collective? And rather than it always going back and forth, the pendulum swing is saying, how do we do both? How do we do what's best for the collective and both for the individual? Now, what happened for me in morals and New Thought was, and I'm sure most of you have felt this way before, the more we know our interconnectedness, we move away from just our physical bodies and we recognize deep down, energetically, causal level, the deepest spiritual level, every one of us is connected. And when we really know that, not just in theory, we can't hurt other people, not because we're going to get sued, but because we know we're hurting ourselves. That any person I take from, I'm taking from myself. If I'm judging, I don't know if you experience it, I experience it like that now. I judge someone, dang if it doesn't come right back to me so fast. We start to recognize that everything I do to somebody else, these aren't just theories, it's actually happening. It comes right back to us. We're judging ourselves, we're hurting ourselves. Anytime I'm out of alignment with our principles that there's one life, one power, and one presence, and the wholeness and the perfection that exists in through and as everybody, and I'm treating somebody as if they are not part of me, then I'm going to actually start experiencing that. I'm going to start experiencing the pain of my discord, my discordant thinking. So there became in me this idea, well, if everyone just woke up to oneness, we wouldn't have these issues because we would automatically do the right thing. And as I was with that this week, the thing that kept coming to me and why I really value what Confucius brought and why I think he was so successful, spirituality is incredibly powerful and this work is incredibly powerful, but it's all happening on the invisible level. And sometimes it's just hard to grasp and feel it. I hear people saying to me, I just don't feel it. I get it, I hear it. There's times I have felt it, but I'm not feeling it at all right now. And when times are really difficult, sometimes is when we don't feel it at all. And that's why I think, I don't want to spend a lot of Sundays on moral ethics, but to spend one Sunday to say, so it's nice just to have a sense of what's my moral code, even when I'm not feeling the oneness. Even when I'm feeling in the darkness and I want to hurt someone, I want to talk down to them, or I do hurt down them because we go to forgiveness. When I do act in a way that I don't want to act, or I say things that I don't want to say, what is my moral code that I can turn to? That's on the physical plane. What are acts, practices, and actions that I can take that even though I don't feel it are in alignment with my moral code? Because what I've discovered in New Thought is that we're not always awake. We want to be awake, but we're not. So what is our moral code when we're not awake? How do we treat one another when we're not awake? How do we operate in the world when nobody's looking? When nobody can see what we're doing, how are we operating? I remember Reverend Joan always used to say, and I remember it because I've had to think about it a lot, and she said, is someone safe in my mind? Meaning, am I thinking about someone so negatively that my energy in my head is negative around someone, so they're not really safe in me because I don't know if that makes sense to people. Someone's safe in my head. That's just an inner moral code. And if it's not a moral code, why isn't it? And I had, to be, because then I'm like, well, but I need to process negative things, so how do I do that? And so I had to really be with that. How am I with that? How do I deal with the negative things in me? I want people to be safe, but I still have to deal with things. And this exploration, it can be incredibly profound and deep. And it affects every one of us in this room, right? How we show up in the world, who we are, how we want to behave when no one else is looking. And the thing that I always remembered, so I'll just end it here, because there's no end to this, but it's really valuable and important. And as you heard in Kathy's reading today, Confucius impacted Chinese history for 2,000 years. It's extraordinary to have this common ethics. I still really hope we have it. I hope we have a New Thought practitioner, United States chaplain someday. I hope we have New Thought practitioners holding vigil in Supreme Court, and then we'll get this whole ethics thing going. I got it all planned out. And I don't remember what I was going to say, but anyways. So let's, what is our moral code? Oh, the thing I remember to say is the thing that I always remember when people talk about everyone can see your information on Facebook or Twitter, and I keep thinking, God already sees all my information. The divine sees everything about me. There's nothing hidden. I can't pretend that I'm not thinking something if I'm thinking it. I can't pretend I'm not feeling something if I'm feeling it. That we're open books to the divine. I remember even Yogananda saying that both he and his teacher could see inside of people, and they just made it a moral, ethical code within them not to go into people's interior life without permission, because they could see what was happening inside. But they had the ability to. So on some level, on the deepest level, there's nothing hidden. So any idea that we think we can hide things, in spirit we can't hide anything. So what is our moral code? Of when we're dealing with this very difficult physical life, we're dealing with political situations, when we're dealing with humanitarian situations, when we're dealing with our parents, our children, our workers, our co-workers. There's so much stuff that comes up with co-workers. Where is my moral code? So this week, if you can, just see, what is your moral code? Do you have one? Are you even aware of it? See, I think we all have one. We just are not always aware of it. So explore that this week. What is your moral code? What is your moral code, especially when things are difficult? What is your moral code of how to behave, of what's important for you, of how to behave, what to say? You with me on that? You going to try it, you think? Great. Thank you. All right, so let's shift from this wonderful exploration of what our moral codes is into the source of every one of us that already knows everything. I'd like to, can our practitioners please stand and join me here today, needing that wonderful spiritual energy of all that work you've been doing to clear your consciousnesses to be vehicles of the divine. Our practitioner core is so powerful when they pray. Woo. Okay. And again, it's not the words that are important, it's where the words are pointing to, the divine presence within us. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, infinite and eternal one, divine presence. This presence that is greater than all that we could ever humanly conceive or think. It is all that we think, and it is greater than that. And so we turn our entire awareness to this, that which cannot be named, that which is nameless, formless, beingness, that is always already enlightened, that is already awake, fully alive, fully abundant, peaceful, joy-filled, clear, fearless, loving, peace-filled. It is all. It is all. It is all. It is who we are. On every level and dimension of our being, we are this one power and this one presence. Every aspect of our being, our causal bodies, our energy bodies, our physical bodies, our emotional bodies, our mental bodies, our financial life, our relationship life, our work life, every aspect of our life, there's one. There is only this one. There is only this one, and it is infinitely good. It is infinitely good, and it is infinitely caring and compassionate to all the forms of its creation. Everything is included. There is no other. There is no separation. And it is from, through, and as this oneness that we speak our word here and now for all those beings of light who have given their lives, who have said yes to stepping forth and giving their lives in general to these principles, and as this country that stands for these principles of freedom, for truth, for justice, for everyone, for equality, for everyone. For those who have given their lives for these extraordinary principles in which we stand. And we stand day in and day out for who and what we really are. That we are free, we are equal. We are all abundant, we are all joy-filled, and everyone deserves to know this. We are here to stand for this as a country that works for everyone and a world that works for everyone, for spirit is all. And so I give thanks if there's any place where there needs to be healing along this line. I give thanks for Jeff Fisher and his family as they're holding his father as he moves his, shifting his energy. They are surrounded in love and peace and comfort. For Peggy Berger and releasing, going through this transition with her auntie. Love and peace and tenderness. Releasing Aunt Hallie, Gloria's Aunt Hallie, peace and love and tenderness where love knows no death. There is never any separation in love. That this wholeness and this perfection is one. And this peace and this tenderness and this comfort embraces all of us as we are releasing people. And if you know someone who has given their life in service, military service, which we are honoring this weekend, I invite you now to speak their names out loud into this space. For this love that sees and knows all and never stops loving, and that is our healing energy even now. We claim it, we accept it, we are it, here and now and for always. In deep abiding gratitude and everlasting peace, I release this word now. I invite us all to say together. And so